Hey, welcome back. So this episode is another continuation of kind of building out that Git facade. And right now we have a lot of these Git commands, and we can also have, like I talked about in the very last video, we have both dev and prod environments. You can build your prod environment or build your dev environment. I kind of left it hanging a little bit last time. I got to the point where it was possible for you to build a prod environment, but I didn't really give a lot of the details. I kind of stubbed in everything for you, but the work was still yours to do. So in this episode, we're going to clarify some of those details a little bit. So eventually what I want to get to is I want to be able to build a Docker image and then be able to push that Docker image up to a registry, like either Docker Hub or Amazon ECR or something like that. So let's look and see where we're at right now. Switch over to the code here. The last time I left off, we have these two Docker Compose files. So this is our dev environment and this is our prod environment. And our Git commands kind of have this if statement. So if the first thing is prod, then it's going to set all these variables so that we're building the prod environment. Otherwise, it's going to build the dev environment. So that's kind of where that magic happens. Right now, we have commands like git build, and that'll build the dev environment, or we have like git create, and that'll create a dev environment. It'll actually either clone over your repo, depending upon your configuration, or it'll clone over the Laravel GitHub repo. And that configuration is, again, that's in your .env file. So if you provide a code repo URL, it's going to clone this repo. Otherwise, it'll just grab whatever the most recent Laravel GitHub repo is. And with that said, we also had git prod create and git prod build, and the other ones are git prod start, so to start up your environment. So let's take a little bit deeper look into some of those. So you can see here, if we put prod as the first argument here to our command, we're going to use this Docker Compose -prod. Otherwise, we're going to use the Docker Compose. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Docker Compose -prod. And I've really simplified this. Let's go ahead and just kind of close some down so you can see what's really simplified. So this now only has 3 services. And we talked about this a little bit last time. This is where we were going to head, right? So in production, I probably would have a Redis, like an Elasticache Redis instance that's running in Amazon, or whatever the equivalent is in Azure. Same thing with MySQL. So I might have a Amazon RDS instance running my database. I still need kind of locally, if I want this to work locally, then I need to have these 2 services kind of present. These are the services that, again, in production, they wouldn't be here on my local machine. But because we don't have that end-to-end thing built yet, I still have to have something here in my local environment to help me support kind of our local build of this prod environment. These 2 services are sticking around for a little while. If you look under our web app then has a Dockerfile, and we'll dig into the Dockerfile in just a moment. Passes a lot of environment variables into the Dockerfile, exposes ports 80 and port 443 through whatever you put in your environment file. So in the environment file for prod is here, .env prod, and you can see right now those are on, say, 443.05 and 80.05. One of the things you'll notice here that's different between Docker Compose prod and just Docker Compose, when you look at Nginx, you see these volumes. And what that volume is doing is it's taking the code that's locally here in my directory, so my path to code directory. Again, that's defined in your .env file. So path to code is /code/ whatever the project name was, which is abc_app, which is here. So it's taking this code, and what Docker Compose here is doing, it maps a volume for this directory outside to /var/www/html inside. And this is an interactive volume. So when I make edits here on the outside, they automatically show up on the inside. And that's what I want for my development environment. I want to be able to make changes kind of locally here on my dev box. And then when I refresh the page, I want those changes to show on the page. And that's how that kind of magic is done. It's done with this mapped volume. If I look over at the prod, you don't see any volumes here. The code isn't getting mapped in where it's kind of interactively where I can change it anymore. This is a production image. When we start to look at this Dockerfile, we'll see how that code gets into the image. But that code is essentially going to be copied into the image. It's not going to be editable anymore. it's a snapshot of kind of what that code looks like. So that image now is kind of our version. I want to push the latest version. I grab the latest image. It has the latest code in it. So let's take a look at this web app.dockerfile, which is right down here. And I rebuilt this Dockerfile loosely based upon the other Docker files. Before, we had two kind of Docker images that we built. We built a PHP image. We built the Nginx image. We also built, this PHP image also had kind of Composer installed in it and had a bunch of other things installed. And so we're doing the same thing, but now we only have one Docker file. And instead of basing it off of, you can see here, I based this off of the Alpine version here, and Nginx was based off an Alpine version there. Instead of basing it off of those Alpine versions, this is based off of Ubuntu 22.04. So we're kind of basing it off a little bit larger image. And I feel like that's going to give me some advantages in production. This is going to be a multi-stage build. So the first stage, I'm building up the Ubuntu image itself. So I'm installing everything I need on the Ubuntu, which includes all the packages here that you see, things like Supervisor, LDAP, Samba, Nano, just everything that I think the image is going to need. I also add in all the support for Microsoft SQL Server, so it supports like an ODBC connection. We're installing Nginx into this image, this base image, and we're also installing PHP into this base image. And then a few other tools like Composer and Node and NPM. So that's all installed in the base image. And then the next stage, I build off that base image and I develop the app image. And by breaking this thing down into a multi-stage build, it does save a little bit of time, so it doesn't really have to go and pull this base image anymore. Most of my changes are kind of in these layers down here. In fact, I probably could get rid of the extra stages, but I feel like still it's kind of a little bit cleaner. As long as I only change these later layers down here, then Docker will know what to do and it'll only rebuild the layers that have changed. So now if you take a look at this app image stage, here's where the code gets created inside of our image. So this is our directory where all the code's going to go. So the first line here is, first of all, I'm just going to remove that directory. So if there's any default web stuff in this image, that's going to get deleted first. And then I'm going to remake that directory. And then I'm cloning in our code repo. So then on line number 95, this is where I'm cloning in our code. So I'm using git clone. I clone down the repo that whatever I've configured it up, and I'm putting it in this directory. And again, that configuration where that code repo is that's in your .env prod file, and it's at the very top in your code repo URL. So right now, I'm cloning this Laravel demo project that I've been using for quite some time. And the next step is I copy in the Laravel production environment file. And there's a directory here that holds this information. So here's our development environment, and here's our production environment. And in our production environment, and again, we're taking steps. So baby steps towards our end goal. I still have a DB connection. So this is still based upon the Docker container. So that's why it's called MySQL. That's the service name. And same thing with the Redis. So if you look down here where the Redis connection is created, the client here, the host is called Redis. That's the service name for our Redis Docker container. In a future step, we'll be changing this database connection, and we'll be changing this Redis connection back to our Elasticache and our RDS instance that we have in Amazon. But for now, again, we're baby stepping towards our end goal. So after I copy that code over, I change ownership of that code to our www-data user. And that is the user that Nginx is running under, and it's also the user that PHP FPM is running under. We'll talk more about those users in just a second. I set the working directory as our code directory, which is that. Here, this next bit of code from these lines, I'm going to run as the www-data user. So I'm calling composer install, and I'm also calling artisan key generate. One of the things you're going to notice here is I'm not calling PHP artisan migrate. There might be some migrations that need to be run as part of when you deploy that, but I can't have that here in this Docker file because this Docker file, this is the image. Those other containers aren't even running yet. If I try to run PHP artisan migrate, it would just error out because there's not a container currently running that would allow me to do that migration. Later on, when I switch this thing over to maybe a production environment, then I can come back and reconsider that. But for now, that is not in here. After I'm done running this bit of code, I switch back over to the root user and I set up my PHP environment. So I'm copying a couple of files over here. I'm copying this www-prod into the pool. So this is my, if you look under here, there is two of them. There's a www.conf and a www-prod.conf. These are the files needed for the PHP FPM pool. And so you can see kind of the user setup, the group setup. This one is the prod. It's listening on a Unix socket, and it has the socket owner and the group and the mode. And this also has the information that you need to be able to scale this. In previous videos, we talked about scaling vertically and choosing these numbers in order to get the most out of your server. So whatever instance type you're going to select, like a T2 micro or T2, say 2XL, whatever instance type you're going to select, you want to configure these numbers based upon that old video. And if I remember, I'll link to it somewhere here. But here you can see that the PHP FPM is using this www-data user. A couple other files I copy in. I copy the PHP INI file twice into the FPM and also the CLI. And you can see that here. This has a few modifications, and to be honest, I kind of forgot what they are at this point, but I think max file size or something like that I updated. There was a couple other variables that I updated, but this is the PHP INI file that I'm using. So if you want LDAP support, then here's a file that you need to push in there. And that file has this line here at the very end. If you don't add this line, it'll error out and you will never be able to connect to an LDAP server. The next two lines are creating this PHP 8.3-fpm.sock file. This is what's going to be used for kind of our inter-process communication, and that file is being set up here. So it's either being created and also the permissions on it are set to the www-data user. And then finally, there's a symlink that's created there at the very bottom. Nginx, kind of same thing. We're going through kind of configuring the Nginx. It was already installed in our base image, but now we're making a few directories. So the next thing is we're going to remove the default comp file for the sites available, and we're going to put our own in there. And then there's two of them. Again, this is the dev environment, this is the prod environment. The only real difference between these two, if I scroll maybe to the top, can't see it on the top. Let's go scroll to the bottom here. You can see it just barely off screen, so I'm going to leave it as the first line right there. So if you look at this fast CGI pass variable, it's changing from using a Unix socket when we're in production environment, and then we left it as a port 9000 using the PHP Docker service. So it's a container called PHP, and that's what we're using in this instance. And then again, that was for our dev environment. For production environment, we're just using this Unix socket. These certs are being set up in our next couple of lines of code here. So if you look at this web app, we create the self-signed certificates and we copy them into our application. We get them positioned. I'm not gonna cover these scripts that we run here to create those certificates. I covered that in a previous video, so go ahead and look into that if you want, or you can just dive into the code here and look at these create-ca and create-certificate code. I got some commented out code, and then here's an entry point. So this entry point, we're copying over entry point-prod sh, which is, if I close up all of these directories now that we've kind of looked at them all, and down here is our entry point-prod sh. Let's see what's in there. So if we're given a parameter or an argument, then we'll just run that. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to start the PHP FPM service, and we're going to look at the status of that service. And these two commands right here, these are going to return right away. And that's okay, because we want PHP FPM to kind of start up and return, and then the next command is we're going to run Nginx. And when we run Nginx for this Docker container, we don't want this to return. We want to run this kind of as a daemon or service, and we just want it to run on its own. And that's why we're not using the service command to start Nginx. we're using Nginx itself. And so after we copy that entry point file, we declare that as our entry point in our Dockerfile. And that's it. So let's take a look at this, and how we can do this now is we can say kit prod and create. And what this is going to do is it's going to build our image with the code inside of it. It's going to try to start it up, and we'll see it go there. And you can see it already opened up a tab, and the tab is showing content or showing data. Let's go back to our terminal, and let's go and look and see what it really did here. There was a lot of layers that I've already built, and they've been cached on my machine. So after I run kit prod create, it says it's building the Docker images. And from here on out, you can see that most of these images, they've been cached. So you can see cached. All of these have been cached. This base image, this is the base image. And then I get to the app image, and it has these layers here. These have all been cached. And at the very end, exports the layers and it builds the image. Then it's trying to start the application, and now it has kind of the images running. It has this web app, has the MySQL service and the Redis service, and they're running, and ensures that the domain exists. So there's some code in there to make sure your host file has the proper settings so that you can resolve this. And then it opens up the browser tab, and that's why you see this here. So this is now running my abc_app_prod.local, and it's showing you kind of those results. And the other thing I'll show you is, the Docker desktop here, so you can see kind of those services that are running on Docker desktop. Here is our ABC app, so you can look at that. You can see the entry point got called. So remember the commands starting PHP, and then it asks for the status. This is the output for the status command, and then there's an echo statement, and then it's running Nginx. If I look at all of the files, you can see in var www HTML, this is all of our code was generated or copied into this image. So all of our code now exists in this image file, and that's exactly where we want it. Composer's already been run, and obviously the website is functioning as we expect. That's one more step towards getting to where we want to be. And the step that we just took was we got our code not in a volume anymore, but it's actually part of my Docker file, and it's being cloned or get cloned into the image. So I'm building this image based upon some code, and this image now kind of encapsulates, or it's a container for our application. All right, the next step is let's push that image that we just created up to a Docker hub or a container registry. And we're going to use ECR for this. You can type ECR in the search area here, and you can find it. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new repository. I don't have any repositories created this time, so we're going to create it. So I come back over. This is my kind of image name, and I'm just going to copy. See if I can copy that. No, that's not let me copy. Maybe I can copy it from maybe here. And if I switch back here, I'm going to paste that in as my image name. And so that's going to be the container registry that's the repository that we're going to create here. I'm going to leave everything else, I believe, the same. So we're going to keep it private, public. Let's see, that's all the same. So we're going to keep this, and we'll click Create Repository. After the repository is created, if you click on this repository, you're going to get some instructions on how to actually use it. So you're going to view these push commands. In an effort to make this simpler, I created a kit push command that we can use. We just have to set some environment variables. So here you can see kind of all of the commands that you need to be able to, log in to Amazon ECR, build. We actually just did the build, so we don't have to do this step, but maybe tag and then push to our repository here. So in order to do this, let's go ahead and start to set up our environment. I'm going to go ahead and close out all of the files, and I'm just going to open up this .env example. At the very bottom, there's some new variables that you can set in your environment file, and I'm going to add these to my production environment. And so the registry type, this is going to be AWS or lowercase AWS, however you want it. The registry region, so if we go back to our push commands, you're going to see here the region is US East. Let's go ahead and copy that. And we'll put that region right there. This registry username, that was also in this login information. Here's the registry username, AWS. The registry URL, there's a URL that's here. So standard in, I'm going to copy all of this information all the way to the end here. And that's our URL. And then the final bits are the registry name, which is, you can see it here after all of this. We're going to go ahead and copy that and put that registry name in there. And so by supplying this bit of information, now down in my terminal, I can say git prod push, and this will run a command to do all of these commands for you behind the scenes. So what it's really going to do is it's going to do step number 1. It's going to run line number 3 and line number 4, and it's going to push the current image up to this repository. So let's go ahead and run that command. So after I run it, it says it found an Amazon ECR registry. The login succeeded, and it's starting to prepare all of the different bits. It's pushing these. There's some that are waiting. We'll just go and let this finish up. And it has completed. So at this point, if we go back to our Amazon registry and I refresh here, you can now see that we have an image that's been pushed up to the repository. That's kind of where I want to get to in this video, is I want to be able to push these images up to this repository. Downstream, we have to be able to use these images. You know, whether we're going to use like an ECS or EKS or something, we're going to have these images available for us to use. So right now I have this image. It's in my repository. Okay, so now let's make a little change and see if we can push that change up. So we're going to come back to our code. We're going to open up our Dockerfile. Down here towards the end, I'm just going to run an echo hello command. And this line is, all the layers above that line are going to stay the same, but towards the end it's going to break the layers, right? So then I can say git prod build, and that'll kick off a build for our production image. And you can see everything's cached except for, hey, I found this new layer here, echo hello world, and now it created those images. And now if I want to push that image up to the registry, I can say git prod push, and it found ECR. A lot of these layers will already exist, and it's only going to update the one that has changed. And so now let's go and see. We'll refresh here, and I have 2. So I have the old one, which I pushed at 16:05 about 3 minutes ago, and this new one, which I just pushed at 16:08. All right, so before we leave, I want to just kind of give an indication of what's next. So there's still some outstanding work we have. Right now we have the ability to kind of build a production image with the ability to push that production image up to Amazon ECR. The next thing is, well, how do we deploy that image from Amazon ECR to production? Maybe using either an EC2 instance, manually doing it, or maybe we use something like ECS or EKS to kind of automatically help us kind of with those production and help us kind of orchestrate our production environment. So that's what's next, is those kind of orchestration steps. How do we actually get this into production? So if you like content like this, hit that like button to subscribe. It does help the channel out. I try to post 1 video a week, and you can see kind of the content. It varies between, what we're looking at here, which is the Docker kit for Laravel. There's prompt engineering, scaling horizontally, scaling vertically, Amazon AWS series. There's videos on AI, and there's Python, Docker. So if that kind of content is interesting to you, again, hit that like and subscribe button.